Morning everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm going to share my screen so that I've got the presentation in front of me, and I'm going to time myself so that I stay on time. So again, thank you, Angela. Thanks to Answers for Association for having the opportunity to run this webinar today. And it's good to see some of our clients here, as well as some of our friends from New Zealand, Malaysia and Singapore. To give you a bit of background, I've been working in the not-for-profit and government sectors in revenue generation and commercialisation roles for over 20 years. I'm on the board of Transport Heritage New South Wales, and I also chair their Risk, Finance and Audit Committee. And shout out to Rob, who's my chairman, who's on the webinar today. And I've also been on the boards of a number of other not-for-profits, including Dress for Success Sydney, Sydney Improvised Music Association and Business Events Sydney. And with my company and my experience, I'm going to share some of those insights with you today. Before I launch in, as any good consultant, I want to make a disclaimer that today is not about financial advice. And really what I'm trying to do is give you some thought provokers around how you could diversify your revenue streams, because there is a lot out there. So let's get started, and it's a pleasure to share some of my insights with you. So I'm going to cover off, as I said, some revenue stream diversification opportunities that I think you could have a look at. I am going to suggest some navel gazing, because looking internally, and I'll explain what I mean by internally in a moment. And I'm also going to give you some practical examples from other associations around Australia and internationally that have diversified their revenue. And I'm also going to give you some tips on looking at some of the next steps you could take from here, some of those practical steps. Now, I won't cover everything on revenue generation, but what I will say is if you're particularly interested in sponsorship or membership models, please jump onto the Answers for Associations portal, because they have some good webinars, both past and coming up, around some of those topics. So look there for more information. And as Angela said, I would love you to throw questions in the chat or in the Q&A, because we will get through those. If not today, we will answer them post the webinar. So revenue streams, there are a huge range of revenue streams that associations can go through. My suggestion to you is, I certainly don't expect that associations would have all of these revenue streams, but I do anticipate that you should have a good 2 or 3, or even 3 or 4 revenue streams that align with your mission and your core values. And that's a really important component for you. Each can bring a varying level of income, and for many associations, one of the key challenges is resourcing. So if your revenue streams are not generating sufficient profit, as in income minus expenses, the profit margin should be healthy. If that is not healthy, then one of the things I'm going to suggest you look at is the resourcing of that revenue stream, because that is often where we fall over. We haven't allocated either the right number of resources or technology, resources is not just people, or the right skills to generating that revenue stream. The other area around profit generation and revenue generation is around making sure that your staff and your members are also aligned with your revenue streams, because the more passionate your people are around a particular element of your revenue stream, the better it's going to produce for you. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. Now, this other option down here is a huge option. And as I said, each association can have different revenue streams. This could include things like merchandise, retail. Some associations do consulting work. Some sell their thought leadership or publications. So the other is a big bundle. And again, it's what's aligned to your association's mission and what's right for your particular association. There isn't, unfortunately, a silver bullet and one size fits all. Now, what I've done here is just indicate for you my thoughts and my take on the marketplace in terms of some of the associations we've been dealing with. The up arrows are where we've seen revenue streams or profit go up, the down where they've gone down, and the all over arrows are where it's changing and quite diverse. Now, the message I want you to take from this is you should know where the revenue streams or how the revenue streams are going for your association. And if you don't, I recommend that an action from today is that you take a forensic look at your different revenue streams and how they are moving to other associations or like associations either globally or nationally. I'm going to give you I want to show you an example around an association that had a revenue stream that was predominantly events-based, face-to-face events-based. Now, they were a free membership association, but you had to qualify. This was an industry association that was significantly impacted by the pandemic. And what I mean by that is businesses closed down, people lost jobs. Now, as I said, their main source of revenue was through face-to-face events, but during the pandemic, their membership grew by 30%. Now, what's really interesting about that is the online engagement of members increased exponentially during the pandemic. The association really made it known that they were there to support the industry, not necessarily by lobbying, but by advocating and helping support members in the online platforms where they could. The other significant change that happened pre-COVID to during the pandemic and still ongoing is this online engagement. The member-to-member support was there previously, but increased exponentially. As a result of this, when face-to-face meetings were able to occur, the members came up with an idea to start local geographic meetups. So in Australia, we were able to meet up between groups of 10 or 20. And so local meetups occurred. Now, previously in the face-to-face events, these events only took place in major cities. So this was an interesting, and it was again low cost. One of the other comments which has come back to me is, how do we support members where many of them has lost their income and they can no longer afford their membership fees? And so I'd be interested to see any of you who are in the room, please make comment in the chat whether you have a free membership or a paid membership, or how you dealt with your unemployed membership base or companies that couldn't afford to pay membership fees. But this organisation did it well. And as a result of that, their sponsorship revenue, previously tied mainly to those face-to-face events, then moved to organisation-wide because of that level of engagement of members, and it was an organisation problem-solving situation for the sponsor and also the association. So I really like this example. Now, I want to talk a little bit about navel gazing. Excuse me as I turn over my notes. I have to have notes or else I talk for hours. Those of you who know me know that that's a true fact, or that's a fact. So a bit of navel gazing is one of the things I recommend. And when I talk about navel gazing, it's really asking from within where you can diversify or how you can diversify. Have you actually asked your members, your donors, your board, your staff, all of the people who engage with your association? And I know many of you might say you do, but do you really ask, listen, and then think about how to act on some of those recommendations? The other element about that is deciding not to act is also making a decision. And so that's also a good way to go about it. The thing about members that we all know is that they are very, very eager to share their insights, their creative ideas, their ideas on how you can do things better because they're passionate about the organisation. And the other thing about that is you don't have to do it in a costly way. And before we finish up today, I'm actually going to give you some survey questions that you can ask. There are survey platforms out there that you can use for free. It doesn't have to be a survey. There are lots of ways you can do it, but a survey is the most cost effective, if you like, particularly if you don't have a budget to address. And those of you who have already done this, I urge you to do it again. And one of the other associations that I'm going to share with you, another association example, asks their members frequently, not too much to annoy them, but frequently enough where they are continually asking the question and changing what they're doing or adjusting what they're doing to align with those membership, the membership sentiment changes. So this is a comment from one of the directors, and I'm going to share this association's diversification story with you. And I really like this quote because it says, there is a perception out there that a not-for-profit can't do things as equally well as a commercial. And many of you sitting around at your desks know that this is not the case. But it is a perception, and sometimes it's a perception from staff internally as well as externally. And when we come back to that question of asking our members, what are our diversification opportunities, your staff are one of your key assets. You know this, but they're the ones who stay with your organisation for many years. They feel passionate about the cause. And if the revenue stream is going to take a significant amount of time to bear fruit, they're the ones who are going to see that fruit through. So you really want to have your staff engaged in that process as well. So the diversification story that I'm going to share with you is an Australian association that's been around for more than 50 years. They have 150,000 members and $21 million of revenue. Now, I know that that's a lot of revenue and turnover in terms of some of the associations in the room, but it's a good example because they went through 3 diversification strategies. Now, why? What was the reason they needed to do that? Well, firstly, 95% of their revenue was coming from membership income streams. So that was a huge risk. So they really needed to diversify that risk. The first thing that they did was they went through a new type of marketing licensing arrangement. And this was a corporate to association partnership. It was the first time that they were exploring this idea, which was a risk for members who really didn't like a corporate partnership associated with the membership, with the association. And it was the first time they were going to try something on this scale. So how did they decide to do this? And what did they explore? The first thing they did was they looked at their parallel competitors in the Australian market. So what were their competitors who were corporate organisations doing? What models did they have and what models were working? The second thing they did, which was the vital step really to make sure that they pushed this through internally, was that they looked at their sister organisations globally. Now, this association had very good relationships and still has very good relationships with their sister associations. And I urge you to think about which sister associations, whether it's in another state or whether it's another country, can you work with? It's important to note that they did have good partnerships. And what they noticed with these sister organisations, and what they did was they uncovered that globally, Australia was well behind their international counterparts. And what was also interesting was that internationally, there were different spectrums. So New Zealand, for example, had initiated this marketing licensing arrangement and had flooded the market, whereas Germany was a bit more conservative. Germany didn't flood the market. They took a very restricted approach to the point where they outsourced the marketing initiative and then took a commission so that they really capped the level of revenue that they could generate from this. Now, in 2021, this revenue stream is 10% of their total, of this association's total income stream. So they've already increased or reduced that risk of their membership revenue fees. The second thing they did was develop an affiliate marketing program. Now, some of you may know this, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but in 2019, this revenue stream is currently sitting at 1% of their total revenue, and they anticipate it will go to 5% in the next 2 to 3 years. So already we've got a 15% between these 2 revenue streams, we've got 15% of diversified revenue. Now, affiliate marketing is where a consumer might be on your website and you refer them to another website. So for example, a health association might be promoting first aid courses with Australian Red Cross. If there is an affiliate program between Australian Red Cross and the Health Association, when I book on the Australian Red Cross website, if I've come from your health association website, a referral fee goes back to the health association. Now, I will say that this affiliate marketing is really good when you have a mass volume of transactions. So if it's a small volume, really there's a bit of work involved, and it's probably not a great option for you. But it worked for this particular association, or it's on the growth trajectory. Now, the third area of diversification for this association was donations. And many of you think, well, we already get donations, so what? The interesting thing about this is, again, I said this association has been around for over 50 years. They don't have DGR status. And in 2019, they asked their members, how, just for some sentiment. And the feedback was members wanted to make donations. They wanted to keep the organisation going, help it financially, and make sure it was sustainable. And they didn't care that it didn't have DGR status. So in Australia, for those who aren't Australian, that's a deductible gift recipient, which means there's tax deductible benefits to the donor when they make a donation. So when I touched base with the association just last week, they said the donations were still going well. They don't have a percentage that they can share. So on this screen that you can see, I've got the 2 revenue streams that are diversified and the third without a figure there. Now I'd like to touch base on free events and free webinars, because many of you do host free events and free webinars. And I'm going to ask you, how do you leverage from those free activities? And again, someone asked me around, how do we deal with when we've got so many people in our sector who've lost their jobs? Free events like today are a really good way to engage with the sector and support the sector that you're trying to advocate for. But you need to know about the data. There's no point having hundreds and thousands of people if you don't know who you're talking to, and who you think you're talking to is actually not there. When you registered for today, there was a series of questions that you were asked, only 2 or 3. And one of the things that you can do is ask those questions to start to understand who's engaging with you, who's taking you up on those free opportunities. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But this doesn't have to be a laborious or major project. It can be very simple. And even if you've got a free technology subscription, usually there are some options which are very cost effective to explore asking some detailed questions. Now, once you have the data, you need to mine the data and start to look at that data as your lead pool. So for example, it could be as simple as non-members being converted to members. But in today's environment, one of the things that we're seeing in the partnership or the sponsorship space is problem solving. So if you identify one of the people who's registered or watched or registered and didn't attend, but you think that they have the potential to be a partner with you, then this is where the lead pool starts. Now, for those of you who are operating in a sales environment, you know that your sales pipeline needs to be huge before you can mine down the filter to the actual conversion. So just think about this as your sales pipeline. Now, chat rooms. I've said to you, please ask questions. I've said to you, we'll ask questions. We'll follow up with those questions at the end. This is actually one of my bugbears on free webinars, is that the questions aren't answered, or the questions aren't followed up. So many people register and don't attend. In fact, generally it's around 30% drop off, or sometimes about 50% drop off. So one of the things that you need to think about is whoever's moderating your webinar, respect the people who've attended in the room and respect them for coming live and answer their questions. And if you don't have time, acknowledge the question and answer it later. It's a really, I talked about member engagement. This is one of the ways that you can engage people. And the other bit about the chat rooms is many of you have volunteers or students. You don't have the resources to be monitoring the chat rooms. I understand that. So use some of the resources that you do have to monitor the conversations that are taking place, even if it's post the event, because that's where you'll find out a lot of information, particularly between member to member or industry to industry, on some of the opportunities to diversify your revenue. As I said, looking within, navel gazing will actually often reveal some opportunities for you to explore. Now, data. I did go on, oh, sorry, I've forgotten revenue streams. So the other bit on revenue streams is if you're offering things for free, there is a really good opportunity to upsell. And I know that terminology is not great, but what I mean by that is, I'm going to give you an example in the resources that we include as part of this webinar. Is there was a Hong Kong summit which took place in July last year, and it had to move from the face-to-face to the digital. Now, what they did was, it was a 3-day event. They offered everything for free, so anyone could register. They had 5,900 registrations, 20,000 views. And what they then did to those 5,900 registrations is they offered unique bespoke opportunities. Now, this was a technology space, a technology summit. So those buy-up options were critical to generating the revenue. Now, what's also interesting about this is the sponsors that were previously engaged in the face-to-face event came on board in a big way with this digital event because of that level of engagement and the buy-up from the free registrations. What's also interesting about this example is while people did buy up, that wasn't where they made their money. They made their money from the sponsorship, from the sponsors who were so impressed that they had these opportunities to talk to these delegate registrations. All of these people globally, or actually predominantly in the Asia Pacific, on this technology summit. And I'll put the link in my notes for you, and I'm happy to share some more insights because I did interview the organizer of that association as well. So while we're on conferences, I want to give you an example from the UK. I talked about knowing your data, and this is a really good example of an organizer who knew their sector very, very well. This is a conference called Museum Next, which operates in the cultural sector. The cultural sector, as many of you know, decimated during the pandemic. What they did, this example that I'm talking about is actually the third iteration of their conference, but the pricing that you're looking at on the screen is the fourth iteration of their pricing module. And what they did, why I'm telling you that they know their data, their database, was because they implemented this institutional ticket, and the institutional ticket gave, for the price of 2 individual registrations, you got unlimited access. Now, how this came about was initially they saw that people were sharing logins. So an institution was buying one registration and then sharing the login. So what they developed in consultation with their subscribers was this option to have unlimited ticket availability if you bought the £240 option. Now, in actual fact, this became the financial success of the conference. Now, to put this conference on, it cost them £12,000. They sold 500 organisation registrations. So at £240, that's £120,000. So that's a pretty good profit margin on that. So total cost of the conference was £12,000. Just as a by the by, the face-to-face conference costs £30,000 for them to do. Now, this is a challenge they'll have to deal with once face-to-face comes back, which is a whole nother conversation in itself, but their registration fees for face-to-face were around the £480. So you can see the £120 difference. The other thing that's really interesting about this model is that they developed both an unemployed option and a freelancers option. So again, this was a profit generating activity for the client, and they needed to come up with solutions to address the sector. There are a lot of freelancers in this sector. Now, you actually have to make contact in order to find out that the way you get the £60 offer is by offering, 4 consultants have to partner together to get that option. But it is a heavily consultant or freelancer industry. The other thing about the unemployed, you might say, oh, I don't want to do the unemployed ticket because what if we get inundated? Firstly, you had to qualify to get that ticket, and Museum Next only gave away 20 unemployed tickets. Now, they said that it could have been because people's emails addresses had changed because they'd lost their employment, but they still went on a large marketing campaign, which was digital, to try and find those people. So I really like this example because it really shows you how they knew their data. From a personal perspective, if I'm really giving back to the cultural sector, it's a feel-good factor as well, pardon me, that this organisation is creating an opportunity for unemployed. TEDx traditionally does donate an extra X number of dollars so that you can support a student to attend the conference. Again, another feel-good factor. Now, I won't touch on this. This kind of summarises what I've just said about Museum Next, but I will just point to the sponsorship. So they did limit the number of sponsors they had, and they only had 1 sponsor a day, but they could have gone further with those sponsors. So just some quick tips on how you can diversify your revenue streams. And please, again, in the chat, if you've got any suggestions around any of these tips, or you think I've forgotten a couple of critical ones, please add them in. Love to hear your feedback on this. But ask your members, you've heard me say that already. There's lots of ways to do it, and it doesn't have to be too costly. When you ask, please do listen and then do something about it. And as I said, even the decision not to do something is a decision in itself. So you need to make sure that you understand what the opportunity is and what the risks are, and then make that decision from there. Engage with your members. I've given the example of an Australian association as well, two Australian associations where they had strong engagement from their members. That helps create a loyal community. And even if they are unemployed or their business has closed, when things get back, and then again, this is over a long time, you want to keep those members loyal because they are and they support your cause. Consider free options. So the association that I mentioned, the second association that I mentioned with 150,000 members, they generate 80% of their revenue. Now it's 80%, it was 95% of their revenue from 10% of the content. Now, what I mean by that is 90% of the information that they share and their services are free. Only 10% require you to subscribe, and they get 80% of their revenue from that. So that's a really interesting model. Many of you are members of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. They have a similar model. There is lots of content that you can access for free, but if you want to be a member, if you want to be accredited, you then need to pay. And that's particularly for associations that are going through an industry which is facing some turmoil. Think about what are the elements of your services that you could offer for free, and then you have buy-up options. And then only those who can afford to pay will upgrade. The other thing is advocating, and this doesn't necessarily mean lobbying, but advocating and having the back of your members. Again, they are really loyal, and this is a key way to keeping them engaged. Data analytics, I've talked to death, I think, so use it. If you've got it, use it, and if you don't have it, look at ways to get it. Sponsorship and partnership around problem solving, that is changing, and it's about problem solving, not handing over a wad of cash and getting some benefits in return. So think about how your sponsorship partnerships need to change. And finally, budgets. Do look at your revenue streams in terms of profit, and is your resourcing, and I mean not just staff, but is your resourcing of that revenue stream sufficient to help sure that it's efficiently making the profit that you can make on it? Now, before I give you the survey questions that I'm going to recommend, I do want to touch base on my company. And the reason why I want to do that is because I wouldn't recommend to an association something that we wouldn't recommend ourselves. And we went through this process ourselves as a company. We were forced to look at diversifying because we operated in business, events, tourism, and the arts. And as you know, these sectors were decimated by the pandemic. Now, we don't have members, but we do have stakeholders, and I do have a team. So what we did was we undertook a strategy session. We looked internally, we did our own navel gazing, and we looked at what are the things that we do really well. Now, what came out of this strategy session was that we already work in the association sector. We just didn't call it that. We called it something else. So we went through an exercise of reframing what we do and how we do it, or how we talk about it rather. And that's how our partnership with Answers for Associations came about, because this is something that we were already doing well. The second thing that we did was we were operating in the Northern Territory. Now, for those of you who know Australia and the Northern Territory, to win government work, you need to have a 30% local philosophy. Now, we were already working there, we just didn't have anyone based there. So we made the decision to open a physical office in the Northern Territory. And actually, we've just yesterday we had a new project confirmed. So we now have 4 projects, which I've put in there, and 1 pending. And that's since opening the office. And actually today is our 1-year anniversary of that office. So the point is, both of those initiatives that we undertook ourselves had both reputational, financial, and also resourcing risks, because you needed to factor in all of those. And for associations, I appreciate that minimising risk is a critical component. I mentioned to you, I'm chair of the Finance, Risk and Audit Committee of one of the boards I'm on. And so risk mitigation is key. But sometimes those risk mitigations or the blockages are internal, whether it be from members, whether it be from staff. And your staff are your key assets to diversifying this revenue and getting through these blockages. In the example I used of the $150,000 membership model, one of the ways that they got through internally, because there was significant pushback internally, was that they used the sister example, the sister association example, as the benchmark. And that created a level of ease, not only for the board, but for the staff who knew that there were other examples in the marketplace that were aligned with this association. And so that's a really important element for you in considering moving forward. So how do you find out what the blockages are? How do you find out what members or staff feel are the opportunities? So what I've done here is these are 3 tiers of questions that you could ask members. I've only put on 5 questions here, but there's about 9 or 10 questions in each tier. For those of you with CRMs, tier 1 should be covered in your basic demographic data. Tier 2 is a bit more detailed, and tier 3 is essentially starting to get into the member sentiment. So if you'd like a copy of the full survey, there's no charge. We'll send that to you. Just send an email to the info email address on the screen, and we will also email that out to you after the webinar today. So in closing, my final comments to you are, look within. Look at your members, your staff, your stakeholders, your volunteers. Ask them for their ideas and insights. Leverage your free options. What can you do that you offer for free that you can then have a buy up, buy in, or expand? Explore like organisations. Look at the associations which are operating in your space or the commercial operators, and you'll find some alternative solutions. Reevaluate your fees, just like Museum Next is going to have to reevaluate their face-to-face pricing. And then data. You've got to use the data, otherwise why are you collecting it? And that's all I've got for today. We're going to hand over to take some questions, but thanks everyone for your ears.